Colin, thank you so much for being here.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. This is really cool.
If we dive right in, why don't you just tell us about your rowing career up to this point?
So yeah, I started rowing in 2010, roughly. I was playing baseball, and I don't know, I was never an athletic guy. Both my parents went to University of Pennsylvania, but they studied literature and acting. Actually, my dad was a traveling Shakespearean actor and played the organ, and my mom was, an all-girl '80s metal band that opened for Bon Jovi. So like music and theater and the performing arts were a big thing with me, which kind of spills over now into my filmmaking career because there's a lot of overlap. But in 2010, I was playing baseball because I just didn't know what I was doing. And one of the guys on the rowing team who was in high school at the time, and I was in middle school, came up to with my parents, and they had just won the national championship 2 years ago in the lightweight 8. And he was reffing the game just because he used to play and was helping out. And he said, "Yo, you're a tall guy. You don't seem to understand how to play baseball. So why don't you just try this rowing camp out?" And at the time, the rowing camp at Ocean City was for incoming freshmen and anybody who had never rowed before. And the coach took one look at me and, thank God, said, "You're in a boat, son." And so I kind of skid the rules and started rowing before I was supposed to be. I was the youngest kid for about 2 years going into it. And then eventually from there, I really liked the idea of, especially because where we row in South Jersey and Ocean City, we're in the back bay. It's like in the summer, you get the beautiful sunsets, you get these beautiful vistas, birds. Like we have 2 eagles over our boathouse that have just nested. And it's like, you wake up, you go outside, you have 2 eagles overlooking you. And I really enjoyed the process of it. It was the mastery of it. It was something that, with baseball, I didn't really have talent. I couldn't throw. I couldn't really catch. Hand-eye coordination wasn't really my thing. But it was the idea that I could just, as long as I started working on it and going and chipping away at it day by day, I could do something. And I was rowing there in just summer camps. And already I was they're like, "Oh yeah, why don't you hop in the more experienced boat? We got a couple of extra high schoolers that showed up. You want to hop in and row with them?" And I'd row with them. Or, hey, the mothers that had Mothers with Oars, it was called at the time, need an extra rower. And, we trust you enough to go out and row with them. And I was like, sure, why not? So I did that. And eventually when I got into high school, I got onto the team. Didn't really know what it was about. It was my first real experience with athletics and going forward with because it's at Ocean City it's a varsity sport in the spring, so I didn't really understand high school dynamics. My brother, he's a plasma physicist, so sports wasn't his thing, so I had no one to follow suit and understand what was going on. And that year I landed in our freshman 8, and remember, we went out for our first race, and our coach said, "When you guys get up to the starting line, turn around and look behind you, and you're going to see exactly what this is all about." And we were like, "What the heck is he talking about?" Rode up, Lake Lenape, sprint number 1, up to the starting line, went to the stake boats, backed it in like he told us to, locked on, and we all turned around together and went, "Holy smokes." Because from our perspective, it's about a mile's worth of 6 lanes of buoys. And we were like, "Oh, we got to go all that distance." I'm sure you guys know what I mean when you look back and you go, "Oh, geez." So we raced that race and we ended up winning. And then the next weekend we went to St. Andrews and we won again. And it was this kind of fun thing where we were on the road, had no idea what was going on. Happy little freshmen, just happy to be where we were, thinking, "Oh man, we're winning these little races." But we didn't realize that we were winning against St. Joe's Prep and LaSalle and these larger teams, and we had no context. We beat St. Augustine's Prep, and we were like, "That's the biggest thing we've ever done." And we didn't know that St. Augustine's wasn't really a big name in rowing. We just knew it was our local rival. And then we got to the Stotesbury Cup regatta, and I think that's when it kind of dawned on us, because we were coming into the final. We'd won our semifinal against LaSalle, who we'd been butting heads with all season, and we were going into the final. We had no idea what to expect. I remember we rolled up to the starting line, and it was this beautiful morning. We were the first event of the day, and there was this fog out there, and you couldn't see. And I remember it started to dissipate. We were doing our warm-up row, and we roll up to the starting line, back into the staging boats, and they go, "Gentlemen, welcome to the final of the boys' freshman 8, the Robert Suter Cup." And I remember all of us looked at each other, and we're like, "Oh, this is real." You know what I mean? Because before this, it was just kind of a fun thing we did. They're calling us gentlemen, and they're like, "You are now lining up for the final of the Robert Suter Cup. This is the Olympics." We're like, "Whoa!" And I remember we the race started and we got out of the bridge, and I remember I looked briefly over to my left, and we were in front of everybody. And I looked over to my right, and we were in front of everybody. And then for the first time in my life, I was in front of a race, like a big race, playing baseball, terrible, it's like suddenly I'm at this huge event and we're winning. And I didn't look out for the rest of the race because in the back of my head, I had my coach yelling at me saying, head in the boat, head in the boat. The rest of the race, I'm just cranking on it, doing whatever we needed to do. No idea how we finished. And we come out of the finish line, and I just hear, coming around the 250, our coxswain says, LaSalle, LaSalle, LaSalle. And they're the guys we beat the day before, but we were always like 1 second off of them, button heads. And I just remember him saying, we're with LaSalle, keep going, keep going, keep going. And we finished the race, and I looked over, and they were ahead of us. And I was like, oh, God, they got us. How did they get us? They got us. And I'm thinking, all right, we got second place at Stotesbury. Okay, this is something. And then we're rolling around, and we're getting in order, and they're like, all right, guys, we're going to get you in order. Third place, St. Joe's Prep. Second place, LaSalle. And we all went, what? Because none of us were looking out of the boat except for our stroke seat, who like to get in the staring contest with their stroke seat over at LaSalle. And we lost our minds. You get on the dock, you do the thing. Yeah, it was the first time our school had ever won Stotesbury. We had no idea. And we were sitting there on the dock like, all right, guys, we just got to get the medals and we got to get out of here before they find some way to take it away from us, because we're little old Ocean City and we shouldn't be here. And there's St. Joe's Prep and there's LaSalle, and we beat them, and there's going to be something. And I remember the guy came up to us with the trophy, Robert Suter. And he actually helped found our program, which was crazy. He has a house in Ocean City, helped the fundraising for the initial start in 2004. And he says to us, gentlemen, you broke the chain. And we went, oh my God, we're so sorry, sir. We're so sorry. We didn't mean to break anything. We're just happy to be here. And he goes, no. You guys didn't do anything wrong. You broke the chain. As in, this trophy has been passed back and forth between Winter Park and St. Joe's Prep for the past 10 years. And you're the first non-Winter Park or St. Joe's team to take it. And we were like, what? And he's like, yeah. And he says, here's your trophy. and that's it. But I tell that story because that's what sunk me in to rowing. It was like stories. And for me, storytelling is pivotal, not only to my job as a live streamer, content creator, video creation, filmmaker, whatever, but also the sport of rowing. It creates beautiful stories like this for any walk of life. I mean, we're in Drexel's Boathouse, and I got to row with Justin Best. And if anybody knows Justin Best, he started out from a club team in Delaware, I believe Unionville, and they're not a well-off big program like St. Joe's Prep, and he was able to work his way to be an Olympic champion. And it's the beauty of the sport is that the hard work will pay off. For me, that's fundamental, and it's like caveman level stuff. Storytelling beats, self-made heroes still exist in this world. And that's what I love about the sport. Growing up with the background in theater and whatnot, I really did find visual media as my thing. I can't draw, but I can sure as heck put a camera in the right direction and figure it out. And then going to school at Drexel, eventually I did go to Drexel to row and to the film department, and went into film and television. So I got the best of both worlds, which I didn't think the television portion was going to be useful until I started doing live streaming. But taking that visual media and combining it with my passion for rowing, was really kind of where I kind of figured out that, we can tell these incredible stories. Just like our story at Stotesbury, there's millions of similar stories just like it. Yeah, so, yeah, just telling a good story.
Yeah. No, and I think that's such a weird and common rowing experience to look down the course, especially like at Mercer. Mm-hmm. Oh, man, and just see the straight shot 2K, 1500, whatever. And you just see, like, in the distance, and it's surreal. I mean, this course over here bends, too.
So it kind of hides the pain. You're kind of like, oh, I just get to the bridge, and it can't be that much further,
it's
right?
Just a straight shot, yeah.
Yep. I remember my first actual long distance. So in high school, we didn't race in the fall except for one time. But most of the time we only did 1,500 meter races. And I remember when I got to college, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to do 4K, 5K, 3-mile races, and we're going to do that starting next week. So are you good to go? I remember the head of the Schuylkill. The one time we did the head of the Schuylkill in high school, like we raced the thing, and there's a picture of us at the Strawberry Mansion, or so the Columbia Bridge, and we look like big, tall, strong guys. And there's a picture of us at the finish line, and it looks like all of us just like our souls had left our bodies. So yeah, no, I get it. It's crazy how even here in Philly, the distances and the racing competition, the course is so iconic, and it's interesting that, that kind of, even though we were in Lake Lenape rowing for the first time, talking about my freshman year, like still there are people that, still have that issue. And I coach now, and when I launch my novices, we always make sure the first race is Lake Lenape 1, because it's stake boats and the referees are calm and delightful, and it's a small event that's done by noon, so there's no rush. They go out for the first time, and I tell them that same thing. I say, guys, turn around, take a look at the course when you get up to the top, and they all come back with the same thing. And if the race goes well, it's a beautiful thing. If it doesn't go well, we learned something. But it's like the most magical thing in the world the first time you get to a race, and especially if you win, it's like, whoa, it changes the perspective of it all. Yeah.
After experiencing rowing from both sides, first as a collegiate athlete and now as the person documenting the sport, how has your experience shaped the way you film and present the sport?
It's an interesting question. From a writing perspective, and this is like day one of screenwriting class, right from your experience, because it's way more profound, it's way more emotional, and you can touch base on it. So for me, rowing since 2010, I have experiences that I can draw off of, and then therefore tell these stories with a legit background. It's not paraphrased, it's not taken from a third party, it's a direct source. So like the documentary, it's a Philly thing. Evo was the senior captain my freshman year. He became an assistant coach and coached us. Justin Best was there. These guys, the stories that are told in there, the footage is my footage from 2017, 2016 on, because I was there. I was present. These experiences weren't lost. So for me, getting the other end of the foot was hey, what did LaSalle do to do what they did once he got there? Who's Matt Weaver? These new questions. But the core of the story is there because I went through Drexel. I went to the Dad Vail. I raced at the Dad Vail. I know what it means. So when I was talking to the athletes who were younger than me, which is, by the way, crazy to think that these guys I didn't even row with or weren't even in school at the time, I could talk to them on a level and say, hey, this, and this. For Drexel, for example, we used to have a battle cry, and it was DVG. It was Dad Vail Gold. And, I could say, what does DVG mean to you? And those guys would be like, oh, yeah, I gotcha. So it's a common shared experience. And I think that's another reason why rowing's so beautiful, is that everything's a common shared experience. It's 8 guys, 4 guys, 2 guys, everything but the single. It's a shared experience. So storytelling-wise, that gave me an edge because I'd experienced it. Whereas somebody like George Clooney has to come in here and try and understand a sport that he's never heard of, seen of, and learn what the sport is, on top of learn why their story is so powerful in Boys in the Boat. I think he did a good job of doing that. But, as somebody who's a rower, watches that movie and you go, okay, yeah, they didn't make up 10 lengths and 20 strokes, but his heart was in the right place. So for storytelling, my way between the documentary and what I do for the live broadcasting portions of it is trying to get into the trenches in a way that I would know and that I would appreciate as a rower. Because I remember going back to that freshman year, the weekend of the Dad Vails, we would have the Atlantic County High School Championship, and that would be the Sunday. Because most of the referees that worked that race were also working the Dad Vail, so they would just pop over on Sunday and do a third day of racing, which hats off to them. I don't know how they do it. Now realizing working on the end, Dad Vail, and then coaching on top of it, I don't know how they do it. But we all got together. We'd have a big pasta night dinner the night before, and we would watch the Dad Vails on television. And this was back when 6ABC was carrying it, and it was a big deal for the Philadelphia region. And for us guys, we thought it was like the national championship. I know it's not, but like they were playing, oh, here comes the copter over top, and here's the side launch, and these guys did this, and these guys got world champions. Because when we're a bunch of impressionable 13, 14-year-old kids going, whoa, I remember at Stotesbury the next weekend, we all sat there and we're like, yeah, man, we're gonna take 2013. We just seen the Drexel win the varsity 8 for the first time in program history, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna hit the bridge and we're gonna do what Drexel did, and we're gonna make that same push, blah. And so as a kid, that was impressionable on me, because I was like, this is so cool, this media. And then now, fast forward 13 years later, I'm putting the Dad Vail on NBC Sports Philadelphia. It's full circle. And it's, for me, as someone who's content producer, I'm not just like, oh yeah, let's just put it out there and let's make it. I want the experience that a 13-year-old kid at their pasta dinner would watch it and say, shoot, I want to go to Drexel, or I want to go to Temple, or I want to go to LaSalle, because look how cool this is. These guys are heroes. And between that and the lifeguard races, I've heard some stories. Like the lifeguard races, one of the key rowers, Sean Duffy, his nephew is young and growing up, and Sean asked, because Sean rows for Longport, and he said, would you rather see the Eagles win the Super Bowl or Longport win the South Jersey Lifeguard Championship, which is 200 years in running? And he said, Uncle Duff, easy, you guys win the South Jerseys. And he said, I see you guys on TV, and I can't wait to beat you in a race-off in 2042. You know what I mean? So this media affects people. And for me, coming from the story, having the experience, lets me tell a stronger story than, say, somebody who's outside the industry who's just like, yeah, we'll just fly a drone and put a camera here, and that should cover it. So I think it's kind of like a arbiter and I have to uphold the standard of the rowing community, because as a member of it, I wouldn't expect anything less.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Well, rowing isn't the most mainstream sport, but you've built a media operation around it. What do you think it is about rowing that makes it worth documenting so seriously?
Well, I think that the answer to the question is in the question itself. Is it's not mainstream, right? It's a very niche sport. It used to be huge. The Harvard Yale boat race used to be publicized on the front page of the New York Times. The Oxford Cambridge boat race, it's viewed by millions of people. We don't have that kind of here. I mean, you watch the Intercollegiate Rowing Associations, and it's still in like 720p. And for a person who is a fan of the sport, I think that needs to change. The way you get more people involved is the same way that I, watching the Dad Vails, got involved and wanted to go row at Drexel, because I saw it and was like, these guys are superstars, is to expose people to it, to see the magic of it. Because being as someone who's been on the other side of it and had some pretty fortunate experiences, I understand why it's important, but I didn't understand until I experienced it. And for most people, they're not going to experience it, but to see it is the next best thing I can do. So like at Stotesbury, the metal dock is like a crazy experience. I don't think people understand, because majority of crews go home after the time trial, right? And it's like, by day 2, it's like the trailer park's quiet and empty. But like getting on that dock is crazy. So we started putting a guy on the dock, especially for the senior 8s and the senior quads, and get in their faces and watch the kids have their celebration. And you start to understand the tradition and the values of the sport, and putting that in a place that is easily accessible. Hopefully will drive other people to be like, yeah, man, I want to do that too. That looks so much fun. Like, look at those guys. That must be a great time. They're racing, and you watch the race from beginning to end. Like we did youth nationals, we had 11 cameras, and we were able to cover this thing in a way that made it as close as we could to a world rowing event. And, you watch it back, and even I don't have any dogs in that race. Row America Rye, St. Joe's, Brett Marin, they're just names. But even I was like, yo, this is a really cool event to be a part of. And to see like a crew like Deerfield, like just snap their fingers and decide, hey, we're not just some, private school up in New England. We're going to actually roll with teams that have, rosters of like 100 kids, and almost take them down and almost win the darn thing. That's a story right there. And I'm completely divorced from that situation. That's the first time I've ever heard of Deerfield, crazy, right? And so like even me, I'm like, if I was a high schooler, I'd be like, yo, this is a great thing to be a part of. So seeing is going to be a huge part of building the sport going forward, making it accessible for people to see what we do and understand what we do and know why it's important. The Henley Royal Regatta does a fantastic job of bringing coverage, because its format is incredibly well done. The side-by-side racing, the win or go home, the stories that they're able to drum up, they try their best. They do different angles. Like one year Temple was going, and Steve Gennaro was stroking the boat in the Temple Challenge Cup with Temple University, and his brother Mike Gennaro was coaching Yale, and it was like Gennaro versus Gennaro, and anybody who knew Yale was going to even their third 8 would blow the doors off of Temple, but it was a good story. But I think that the regatta does a really good job of that, and the format of it is really good. That side-by-side racing on the last day, having a whole week of individual side-by-side gladiatory competitions, you get some great, like last year we had San Diego do some crazy things, and that was a, nail biter race. And normally in a 6-lane race, that might have been just like for places 4 through 5, and everybody would have been like, whatever. But because it was the only 2 boats on the course, it made it exciting. Like, wow, like growing up, when I saw clips of Henley, I was like, yo, I want to go there one day. That looks incredible. So, bringing the video, bringing the content to people, and making it accessible is going to be a huge part in growing the sport and getting more people involved, because they're going to go, yo, that's incredible. I want to be a part of that.
Looking forward, how do you see rowing media evolving, and what role do you want to play in that?
Yeah. So even when we started, we were kind of the trendsetters, which is kind of crazy to think. We were really the first people to implement drone technology within, because everyone was like, Henley's got the drone, and in prosumer technology at the time, drones were really unreliable and had their little quirks that you had to get around, and we figured out a way to do it. So we really jumped on the first batch of drones that could do what we needed to do, and it was good. But even in the 5 years since we've started doing live streams for rowing, it's changed dramatically. I mean, we're talking about, multiple drones on races now. Like when we do lifeguard races, we have 2 to 3 drones out there on the course at the one time, because they row 3/4 of a mile out and back, and there's no way to put a land camera at the halfway point and say, here you go, boys. They're going. And the only way you're going to see it is if you fly out there. So drones are going to continue to be a major part of it. The other portion of the other caveat is, at each of the locations that we go to, like in Schuylkill here, there's no power output, there's no internet connection, there's nothing. So as technology has increased, people are like, I remember this year somebody was like, yo, your coverage at Stotesbury, or one of the races we did, it was great. What did you do and you changed? And I said, our internet connection became more stable. I don't think people understand that when there's 5,000 people standing at the grandstands all at once, we can't use a hotspot to upload video footage, because everybody's on their phones trying to watch the video we're trying to upload. So I would joke around and say, if you turn your phone off, we'd be able to get the live stream up. But we're off of that now. There's different satellite uplink technologies that are becoming more and more reliable most importantly, at a consistent cost. Because we could pay for like one of these professional satellite uplinks that they use for like news crews, but then you're paying more than anything these organizations could ever do. So making a product, what we've done is make a product that was one time used to cost hundreds of $1,000s. Like at Dad Vail's in 2013, they had a helicopter they used to have to drive in a launch that was used in one of the Olympic Games. They had to drive it down from Boston, and they would put it in the water, and they would have to set up this camera. They'd have to run fiber optic along the line. And we're talking about union crews doing this for a week before. We can do it now. We don't need a helicopter. We got $1,000 drone. We don't need fiber optic cables. We have the power of satellite uplinks and wireless video transmitters. So we don't need to run fiber. Launches can be just, a guy holding a camera on a launch nowadays. It's making a product that was once unbelievably expensive and out of the reach of regattas, to anybody can do it now with just a little bit of work. And so that's what we've been doing, is making the product. And we were the first ones to bring drones into the conversation with the Manny Flicks. That's why we kept doing it. Everybody said, we need more drone coverage, and we were the only guys who figured out how to do it. There's more production companies out there doing this kind of stuff now, so it's just staying ahead of the curve and figuring out ways to keep our costs down while still being able to do what we can and pay the people that we employ what they need to deserve for the work they do, but making sure that the regattas aren't feeling pinched because they have to offer this video service. I think that's going to be the biggest thing in my sector. In terms of other things that are coming out there, like rowing influencers and like Cam Buchan and stuff, like that stuff that's popular. Like I watch some of his stuff, and it's really cool to see the perspective of somebody who was once training at Leander and now training to be an Olympic, coastal rower. These perspectives and storytelling can now be done on a cheap budget, and even a guy buying a Sony ASR or wireless camera can now have that forum to speak, as once you'd have to pay out a documentary crew to do. So that stuff's pretty important. But where I see that going is, I see that's going to start, unfortunately, becoming corporatized, because people are like, I want that personality for my brand. So it's a question on how pure we want to keep things, and that's up to the people that are, because unfortunately they're not signed, they're just individuals. How deep do they want to go? Do they want to sell out to a manufacturing company? And there's also the media push with paid for streaming. That's a thing that's happening. I have my thoughts on it. I think there's some pretty good. There's been some pushback. There's been some talks about it and good debate. But I think that that's another big thing that's going to happen is, do we limit the access to our sport so that we can pay, or do we find other ways of revenue? I can say from my perspective, our lifeguard races, we are the arbiters of. The races are held by the cities every weekend, every Friday. We don't have any interaction on how the races run, how it's the referees call. We have no say in disqualifications or order of finish or whatever. We just say, hey, we're going to show up with a couple of cameras. Can you provide us a lifeguard stand here, a lifeguard stand here, and let us fly drones and get approval from the city? And that's all we do. We're just passive observers, and 100% of that is paid through sponsorship dollars. So there's a lot of work that can be done on that, and we offer for free on YouTube for a reason. And it's because we want to grow that sport that not really many people know of, and now people from around the world can watch it. There's a guy I know from Hawaii. He was a couple years younger than me, went to Oakrest, and I remember seeing on his Instagram story, hey, I'm watching the South Jersey Championships from Oahu, wherever he is. And I'm like, this guy's watching it from Hawaii. So keeping the door open and accessible, that's my biggest thing. Keep the sport accessible. I think that's what needs to be done. I think the other thing is seeing how corporations integrate with influencers and following that model that a lot of modern brands are.
Wrapping up, can you tell us anything about It's a Philly Thing, your new documentary coming out soon?
Yeah. So this is, boy, this one's been a long time coming. So, as I said, I went to Drexel. Evo was the senior captain when I was a freshman. Then he became a coach, and he went over to LaSalle. And LaSalle at the time, was the kind of team that couldn't even get out of the time trials at Dad Vail's back in the day. And he, there's a really good line in the film. And it's like, I asked him, so why'd you come here? And it was a story I didn't even know until I asked him. And that's the beauty of this documentary. There are a lot of stories in there that you wouldn't have even known unless you asked. And he said that, I remember we had a March race every year with LaSalle, and it was like our opening scrimmage. And it would be us against them, and maybe like Lehigh would hop in or Villanova. And he said, and I was there that day, and I kind of remember this happening, but not to the extent that he happened. But I remember the varsity 8 came back and won by like 30, 40 seconds or something silly, and they didn't really go all out because they had a race. We had a scrimmage with Penn Lights later in the afternoon, because that's where it was. It was just like, oh yeah, we'll go race LaSalle, and then we'll go race Penn Lights and have an actual race in the afternoon. So Evo was saying he was sitting there. He came down to the dock to retrieve his oar, and he saw LaSalle rowing by, and he just said to himself, I wonder why that team, they practice the same amount as we see them every morning. They're out there at the same times we are. They're doing the same amount of work, whatever it is, 10 to 20 hours a week. What are they doing that's so much different than us? Like, why are they not hitting the same speed as us? And he said, you know what? I'm going to go to that team, and I'm going to find out why. And he did. He went over, he graduated, did a year of coaching here, and then the next year he became an assistant coach, volunteered for a little bit, and was working part-time. And the coach was like, yeah, take him, make him better, whatever. He basically took over the senior, their first 8. And then COVID happened, and then eventually he came back when Tom, I think Madden is his name, the head coach at the time, left. Bill Manning was supposed to come in and take over the program, which is a big name in rowing. I think at the time he was at Princeton, and now he's the women's head coach for Penn. He came in for like 3 months during the summer, and then got a job offer somewhere else and took it, and then left Evo by himself. Yeah, so these are like the stories that you wouldn't have known about, but my point is that I had an idea. It was it was like in the middle of the winter. I remember somebody was like, "Oh, rowing, you should do a Boys in the Boat for rowing." And I said, "Well, I don't have the ability to pay for actors in a sense, because I'm just getting started in this whole filmmaking business." And I remember I was like, "I could do a documentary. So let's do what I know. So let's go talk to some Dad Vail schools and figure it out." So a couple of years ago, I had an idea of doing like a documentary with Yale and Washington, who at the time were IRA rivals, and Steve Gladstone since like 2016, like won in Henley, and then since then hasn't lost to Washington. And I wanted to do like a 2-week lead up with both teams from the Pac-12 and the Eastern Sprints respectively going to the IRA and their prep, and when they met finally, and it was Titans clash, and it would have been this cool thing. And I reached out to them, and it looked like we might be able to do it. And then unfortunately that was 2020, so we didn't do it. And then the next year, Steve had a documentary going on, but then he said he was retiring, so we didn't know if it was going to be still a thing we could pursue, and I respected that and understood that. So I had the idea still in my head, and then so I went out with this idea about Dad Vail rivals and was like, oh, let's do all the boathouses. And so I went down and I called up Evo because I was like, hey, let's get this thing started and let's see where we go, because he's friendly with me and whatnot. And so we sat down and we chatted, and I talked to his team captains, and I had like these generic questions set up. And as we were talking, I started adding more questions. And as we're talking to the guys, I was adding more questions, and I was finding out all this crazy stuff about LaSalle build up and all the things. And I found out about that story about Evo and getting started. And I found out about Bill and how, Evo got the program handed to him with, no assistance or whatever. And it was like, oh, this is a great story. And I was like, well, let's call up Drexel. They're my alma mater. I can easily get Paul in here. And, at the time, Paul had just became program director, and Matt Weaver had just become the head coach for the men. And I was like, let's get to know this new fresh face of, Philadelphia rowing. And I knew nothing about Matt. I did some research online, found out some interesting tidbits. It went so much deeper. I found out that, he didn't get recruited to row at Penn. He went to Penn. He was a Penn lightweight rower from Roman Catholic, but he didn't get recruited to row. He just kind of applied to the school and crossed his fingers, got in, and then ended up being one of the better freshmen on the team that year. Got third at the Eastern Sprints. Upon graduation, he went over to England, did a stint there, and then he also did a good bit of work at Washington. He assistant coach there during 2021, the year after COVID. And just was coaching the 3V that ended up winning the IRAs. Did work with like the Canadian and U.S. national U23 teams, won some medals. Still doing that now, and then eventually got brought over to Drexel. And it was like these stories were great, and I was like, yo, man. And then I found out the interconnection between the Drexel and the LaSalle story. The rivalry, the Evo. I didn't realize how the LaSalle guys knew Evo was a Drexel guy, and they were determined to beat their coach's old school. And it was this really cool story that was, as I was asking these questions and getting deeper into it, especially with the athletes, I was like, this is the story. This is that rivalry story that I wanted to do with Yale and Washington, but this is a more pure version because it isn't these big rowing powerhouses. It's Drexel and LaSalle who are up and coming, and it's just a couple of guys, from each team that just really want to win an amateur race. It's the Dad Vail, but the IRA has a different kind of student. Most of those guys are international athletes and they're world champions and blah, blah, blah. But these are just like, yeah, I came from St. Augustine's prep and I, worked my tail off and I might be able to win this big race. And let's talk about that. Let's make this interesting. And the more I did this piece in digging into it, the more I realized that this is becoming not just a story about the Dad Vail rivalry, but coaches coaching coaches, how Paul Safel affected Evo into becoming what he is today, how Matt's previous coaches like Colin Farrell affected him and how he coaches and how that inspired him to go on, the athletes, the legacy, just the overall the sportingness of Philadelphia rowing. I really wanted to make sure that if somebody sat down and watched this, they had no idea what rowing was. They could understand what rowing was, what a rowing race is, how it works, understand how they train and why a race like that matters, because I went through it, so I had to demonstrate to people who are watching how it works, and then understand the story and the stakes involved with the individuals, because that's going to draw more intrigue than just being like, yeah, Drexel and LaSalle, they hate each other. No, they don't hate each other. They're actually really respectful of each other because of their shared heritage. And it turned to be a really, really interesting narrative of that, and it's the beauty of documentary filmmaking. You don't know what it's going to be like until it's done.
I think that's all we have. Thank you so much for your insight.
Perfect. Thank you guys for having me. This is really cool, and I hope you guys have the best of luck come spring.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time.